Imagine a town where the laws change as you cross the street. A place where time seems to have stood still, leaving behind the echoes of a vibrant past. Well, this is exactly the case in Glenrio, a ghost town straddling the border of Texas and New Mexico. Once a bustling hub on the legendary Route 66, it now exists in a twilight zone between two states. So my question is, how did this town come to be divided by a state line? What dark secrets does it hold? And what happened to the people who once called it home? Stay tuned to find out, as today we discover America's ghost town divided by two states. I'm your host Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. Before we get started here, I wanted to take a moment to share something amazing that I recently discovered. We all use browsers in our daily lives, but Opera Desktop Browser makes browsing more than just moving between tabs. It's a tool that improves my daily routine. For example, I just love how I can organize my tasks with tab islands. I group my tabs by project and then collect them to stay organized. It gives me more visual space to focus. I also personalized my tabs with tab emojis, so each project has its own identity. This small feature makes a big difference in my productivity. One of my other favorite features is Aria, which I mainly use with the command line questions or request page summaries without opening the chat. I just press Ctrl+// and get the answers directly. You see, Opera isn't just a browser, it's a creative tool. With Aria Image Generator, I can give it a simple prompt and generate images from scratch, saving me a lot of time when I need visual inspiration. There have also been times when it saved the day, like when I needed to translate or understand a text quickly, and Aria handled it in just one click. The sidebar's integration with services like WhatsApp and Spotify is fantastic. I can check messages or listen to music without opening another tab. Another reason why I love Opera is its focus on privacy. With its ad blocker and built-in VPN, I browse faster and feel secure knowing that my information is protected. So if you haven't tried Opera Desktop yet, I encourage you to do so by using the link in the description. Remember, it's not just a browser, it's a tool to enhance your online life, and I'm so grateful to them for supporting the show. Our story starts back in 1903, when a small railroad town was born amidst the vast landscape between Texas and New Mexico. This settlement emerged thanks to the expansion of the Chicago, Rock Island, and Gulf Railway, an extension of the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad founded back in 1847. Known as the Rock Island Line, this railroad expanded into the southwestern United States, including Texas and New Mexico, facilitating the transportation of goods and people across such a remote region. Located 44 miles west of Tucumcari, New Mexico, and 75 miles east of Amarillo, Texas, Rock Island was surrounded by vast cattle ranches and extensive wheat farms before Route 66 was built. The railroad's arrival quickly transformed the small town into an important transit point for freight and passengers, spurring Rock Island's economic growth, rapidly attracting businesses as well as new residents. Additionally, it facilitated the transportation of agriculture and livestock products, essential elements for the local economy. In 1908, the town adopted the name Glenrio, an evocative combination of the Scottish and Spanish words for valley and river, respectively. Although ironically, the town does not have any of these geographical features, the new name gives it a unique and attractive identity. In September 1910, J.W. Kirkpatrick opened the first business in town, the Kirkpatrick Hotel, soon followed by other companies including grocery and merchant stores, a bakery, a post office, the Glenrio Tribune newspaper, published from 1910 to 1934, a barber shop, a blacksmith shop, a feed store, a telephone exchange, and a Methodist church. So, with such a booming town, by the 1920s, the government improved the dirt roads passing through the area by paving it and making it part of the Ozark Trail Road. By then, the city had a hardware store, a land office, more hotels and motels, gas stations, as well as coffee shops. Be that as it may, this transformation was only a prelude to an even more significant change that would arrive a few years later. Route 66, known as the Mother Road, was officially inaugurated on November the 11th, 1926. To recall the magnitude of this iconic highway, allow me to offer you a few facts. For starters, it ran from Chicago, Illinois to Santa Monica, California, covering a distance of approximately 2,448 miles and crossing 8 states: Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and finally California. Glenrio, situated along this route, greatly benefited from the increased traffic and commercial activity that Route 66 brought. For example, during the Great Depression, it became an escape route for thousands of families seeking a better life in the West. This fostered the growth of small towns and local businesses, including motels, restaurants, gas stations, and other tourist attractions that would pop up along the route. Also, during World War II, Route 66 was vital for transporting troops and material supplies. In the post-war period, the highway became an icon of American culture, immortalized in literature, music, and film. Additionally, the rise of the automobile in the 1950s and 1960s led millions of Americans to travel Route 66 on their vacations, bringing Glenrio to greatness along with them. But we still need to talk about one of the most unique things about the city. It's divided by 2 states. So now that we understand how the town came to be, let's have a look at what it was like to live in a town divided by 2 states, especially when Texas and New Mexico are quite different from one another. Well, this offered a unique and challenging life where laws and regulations could change simply by crossing the street. It all began in the 19th century when borders were drawn as the United States had expanded westward. Federal legislation, such as the Compromise of 1850, delineated the current boundaries of Texas and New Mexico. So when Glenrio was founded in 1903 as a railroad settlement, it grew along this pre-existing division. With that in mind, life in the town was full of contrast. For example, on the Texan side, prohibition laws banned the sale of alcohol, leading to a situation where all bars and establishments that sold alcohol were set up on the New Mexico side. The situation with gas stations was equally interesting. As the prices for gas in Texas were lower, the service stations were set up on that side of the border. Even so, all it took was a few steps to change not only the laws, but the prices. Glenrio's original post office was on the New Mexico side, although the mail first arrived at the train station in Texas. Over time, a new post office was built on the Texan side as well. And when it came to the town government, well, this was rather informal. In Glenrio's history, there's not much specific documentation on how the city was politically managed, especially regarding the position of mayor, since Glenrio was a small settlement that had never reached a very significant size. And this was typical for tiny communities in rural areas of the United States during the early and mid-20th century, when, in many cases, town management was done informally, through community meetings and town halls. Residents frequently handled local matters themselves, sometimes with the intervention of committees or citizen councils. And here's where it gets ugly. Regarding security, Glenrio did not have its own police force, as those duties fell to counties in Texas and New Mexico. Since Glenrio was divided by a state line, the 2 states had to work together to ensure the area was patrolled regularly and that criminals were unable to use the border as a method of escape, meaning life in Glenrio was a constant movement between 2 worlds which were about to change drastically with the closure of the railroad and then the replacement of Route 66. During the 1950s, the town's economy was closely tied to the highway. In other words, daily life revolved around the travelers passing through. However, the situation began to change with the creation of the interstate highway system. President Dwight D. Eisenhower promoted this new road system to improve transportation efficiency and national defense. The interstate highways were wider, faster, and more direct, gradually making Route 66 obsolete. The process of discontinuing the route was gradual. As the new highways were completed, traffic was diverted to these more modern routes. But then it happened. In 1985, Route 66 was officially removed from the U.S. highway system, meaning it would no longer receive federal maintenance. Many sections of the highway were just abandoned or replaced by interstate sections. And this brought absolute devastation to the towns that were once along it, including Glenrio. And the worst part is they thought that they were going to be okay. You see, for years, I-40 ended just east of Glenrio in Texas, forcing motorists to continue traveling on Route 66 to the area of Tucumcari, New Mexico that we spoke on earlier. And this indeed provided a brief income stream for local businesses. But once I-40 was completed in the area, motels, restaurants, gas stations, and other companies quickly began to close. The traffic diversion meant fewer customers and less income for the businesses that once thrived here. As businesses closed and employment opportunities disappeared, residents began to leave town for better opportunities elsewhere. This exodus of people further accelerated the town's decline, leaving it almost completely uninhabited. In fact, the lack of economic activity and the decreasing population is what transformed Glenrio into a ghost town. Today, Glenrio has been reduced to just a few buildings, but remains a popular destination for historic Route 66 enthusiasts who visit it as a historic site, with one of the most photographed spots being that Pontiac parked in front of the old Texaco gas station. The remaining buildings are on the north side of the road, heading west. The first building is the 1950 Texaco service station. Despite years of abandonment, it retains the original pumps and entrance door. Apparently, Joseph Joe Brown Lee, a Glenrio native, built the station and the adjacent restaurant. His house, a 1930s bungalow, still stands behind the station. And this is where, according to local legend, the last resident of the town still lives. Joseph's daughter, Roxanne. The vacant building next to the Texaco station was the Brownlee Diner, locally known as the Little Juarez Cafe, which closed in 1973. The words diner and Little Juarez can still be discerned on the aluminum roof panel. Then, just a few meters ahead are the remains of the Texas Longhorn Motel Cafe and Service Station, built in 1955 by Homer Ershman. This motel was the last chance for travelers heading east on Route 66, as the next town was 44 miles away. The sign read, "First stop in Texas" on one side and "Last stop in Texas" on the other. The last building before leaving Glenrio is the dilapidated post office. And the history of this building is a little bit weird too. You see, in 1925, John Wesley Ferguson built a small gas station on the plot, and this later served as the area's post office. Behind it is the Angel House, Glenrio's oldest building from 1910, which Ferguson used in the 1930s and 40s to house his staff. The State Line Bar in Glenrio, located on the border between New Mexico and Texas, is now just an abandoned building, but its dark past still attracts curious tourists, since this old establishment, built in 1935, has witnessed tragic and mysterious stories. One of the most shocking occurred in 1973 when a brutal assault and murder sealed its fate. The bar changed hands several times until it was purchased by Albert Keith and Denise Leach, a couple who moved to Glenrio in the late 1950s. In those days, safety was a constant concern for local business owners, as the lonely stretches of road were just dangerous. Despite the risks, the State Line Bar remained a gathering place for Route 66 travelers, as was the case on July the 10th, 1973, which seemed like a typical day in Glenrio. Traffic on the town's main street was about to significantly decrease, with the new highway diverting travelers that morning. Hence, they reduced their staff, and 58-year-old Denise was tending bar alone with a couple of passing customers. This is when a young blonde man dressed in blue jeans and a flowered shirt entered the bar, interrupting Denise's conversation with her customers. Customers which, perhaps sensing this man's dark energy, quickly left. Shortly thereafter, a local resident named Cornelia Tapia heard a strange noise from the State Line Bar. To her horror, when she came to check things out, she saw Denise staggering through the back door. Her dress was covered in blood, and Denise was clutching her stomach. As tragically, the man in blue jeans robbed the establishment, as she had become a victim of robbery. Sadly, Denise died before she could even be taken to the hospital. The authorities acted fast, and John Wayne Lee, 31, was arrested a few hours later in Vegas, Texas. A bloody knife and 2 pistols were found in his vehicle. Lee never explained why he attacked Denise, a small, arthritic woman unable to defend herself. On October the 31st, 1973, he was convicted of murder and armed robbery, but avoided the death penalty, and surprisingly was pardoned in May of 1977 after serving less than 4 years in prison. Denise's death meant the final closure of the State Line Bar after nearly 40 years of operation. And as for Albert, he moved to San John, where he spent his later years raising racehorses, an abandoned bar that is slowly deteriorating. Its furnishings crumbling, while the memories of its tragic history linger in the air of Glenrio. Now we need to discuss Glenrio's importance in pop culture, which is directly linked to Route 66. For example, in 1940, Glenrio became the setting for one of the most iconic films in American cinematic history, The Grapes of Wrath, based on John Steinbeck's novel of the same name. The film chronicles the odyssey of migrants during the Great Depression as they travel Route 66 in search of a better life in California. Due to its location, Glenrio witnessed hundreds of these stories, sheltering travelers and providing temporary refuge on their arduous journey west. The film crew spent 3 weeks in Glenrio, capturing scenes that reflected the characters' desperation and hope. Beyond that, the town has been on the silver screen as recently as 2006, this time honored in the Disney Pixar animated film Cars. The film includes an abandoned building designed in the style of the Little Juarez Cafe, which is transformed into a racing museum in the plot. Additionally, an empty Glenrio motel is portrayed as a nod to the town's rich history, as well as its status as a ghost town. Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our channel members for making this episode possible. I hope you'll also consider joining our members area by clicking the join button. Otherwise, hit subscribe. And until next time, I'm Ryan Sokash, signing off.